Chapter 1. The day it broke. The day started perfectly. The sun shone through the lace curtains of my room, spilling golden light onto the dress hanging in the corner. My wedding dress. It had taken months to choose, and I had dreamed of wearing it since the moment it arrived. Today, I would marry the man I thought I couldn't live without. The preparations were flawless. The bridesmaids laughed and sipped champagne as we got ready together. My best friend Maya was there, holding my hand through every jittery moment. She'd been my rock through so much, there was no one else I could imagine by my side on this day. But something felt off, even then. A hesitation in his voice when he called that morning. A glance exchanged between him and Maya during the rehearsal the night before. I pushed it aside, convincing myself I was just nervous. The ceremony was set outdoors beneath a towering oak tree. Guests gathered, faces glowing with anticipation. As I walked down the aisle, he smiled at me, but the warmth in his eyes wasn't the same. It wasn't the way he used to look at me when we shared secrets or whispered dreams of forever. And then it happened. It started as a murmur among the guests. A ripple of confusion. My steps faltered as I saw him, my groom, turn to Maya. She wasn't supposed to be standing there beside him, whispering, laughing. But she was. He reached for her hand, and the world tilted. I froze, the bouquet slipping from my grasp, petals scattering like remnants of a broken promise. My voice caught in my throat as I watched him lean in, his lips brushing hers. Time stopped. The sky darkened. The first drops of rain fell, soft at first, then heavier, until the world blurred. My dress soaked through, clinging to me, a cold reminder of my humiliation. Inside the reception hall, they danced. They kissed. They laughed as if I were a distant memory. I stood in the storm, invisible to everyone. The rain masked my tears, but it couldn't hide the ache in my chest. I wanted him to come to me, to apologize, to make sense of the betrayal. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled at her and whispered something I couldn't hear. When I finally stumbled inside, shivering and drenched, I heard his voice sharp and cruel, "She's such a crybaby." I made a mistake choosing her. The words were knives, cutting deeper than the cold. He turned to Maya, his face alight with a joy I had never seen. And then, as if I weren't standing there, broken and dripping with rain, he said, "I would always choose you." The laughter swelled around me. Guests raised glasses. Someone played a cheerful tune on the piano. It was a celebration, just not mine. As I slipped away into the shadows, the sounds of their joy ringing in my ears, I found myself wondering if this was how it ended for everyone. Not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating unraveling. The days after the wedding blurred into one long stretch of silence. I avoided everyone, family, friends, even myself. I packed away the wedding photos, the leftover decorations, and the dress I couldn't bear to look at. There were ghosts of a future that would never exist. Maya's betrayal stung the most. She had been my best friend for years, the one person I trusted with everything. And he had thrown away everything we had built as if it was nothing. The whispers of pity from those who had witnessed it only made it worse. They didn't say it, but I could see it in their eyes. Poor girl. She wasn't enough. Weeks passed. The rain from that day seemed to follow me, even when the sun was out. I kept to myself, sinking further into my heartbreak, until one day, a letter arrived. It wasn't handwritten. No thoughtful touch of ink or personal note. Just a stiff, white envelope with gold trim. My name was printed neatly on the front. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. Inside was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Maya and Benjamin." I stared at the words, my breath catching in my chest. The wedding date was set for 2 months from now. 2 months. The world tilted again, but this time, it didn't stop. My hands tightened around the card as I reread the names. Maya. Benjamin. My best friend and the man I was supposed to marry. There was no apology attached, no explanation. Just an invitation. I wanted to rip it apart, to scream and cry. But the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I sat there, numb, staring at the card until the sunlight streaming through the window began to fade. The phone rang that evening. I didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. "Hello?" A familiar voice replied, cheerful and casual, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, it's Ben. Just wanted to make sure you got the invitation." I couldn't speak. "Maya thought it would be nice to have you there," he continued. "You've always been close, and, well, we didn't want you to feel left out." Left out. The audacity of his words lit something inside me, a spark of anger that burned through the fog of my grief. "I don't think I should come on," he interrupted, his tone light and patronizing. "It'll be good for you to move on. Besides, Maya would love to see you. She misses you." I hung up. My heart pounded, and for the first time in weeks, the numbness gave way to something sharper. Anger. They wanted me there. To watch them promise forever to each other. To sit among their friends and family, pretending everything was fine. They wanted me to bear witness to their happiness while I carried the weight of their betrayal. I threw the invitation onto the table and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it apart, to forget it ever arrived. But another part, a darker, angrier part, wondered what would happen if I went. What would I say? What would I do? As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the rain pattering against the windows, I made a decision. I would go. Not to forgive them. Not to celebrate. But to remind them of what they had done. And to make sure they never forgot. The day of the wedding arrived, and with it, the weight of every decision I had made since receiving the invitation. For weeks, I wrestled with the idea of showing up. At first, it felt like an act of surrender, like walking into their world would mean letting them win. But as the days passed, the idea took on a different form. I wasn't going to be a guest at their wedding. I was going to be a reckoning. The morning was clear, the sun mocking me with its brightness. I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection unfamiliar. Gone was the soft, heartbroken woman who had cried in the rain. In her place was someone colder, sharper. I had chosen the dress with care, a deep, blood-red gown that hugged every curve and shimmered in the light. It was bold, unapologetic, the kind of dress that demanded attention. My hair was styled to perfection, my makeup flawless. If they wanted me to watch their happiness, I would make sure they couldn't ignore my presence. The drive to the venue was surreal. It was the same place we had booked for our wedding. The same oak tree stood at the center of the garden, now decorated with ribbons and flowers, its branches heavy with memories I couldn't escape. Guests milled about, their laughter and chatter filling the air. I stepped out of the car, the heels of my shoes clicking against the stone path. Heads turned as I approached, whispers trailing behind me like a shadow. "Isn't that? She actually came? Wow, she looks." I kept my chin high, my steps steady. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Inside the hall, the decorations were stunning, every detail perfect. It was everything I had dreamed of for my own wedding, now repurposed for theirs. The irony wasn't lost on me. And then I saw them. Maya stood at the center of the room, radiant in her white gown, her arm looped through his. Benjamin. The man I had once loved. The man who had left me in the rain without a second thought. Their smiles faltered when they saw me. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Benjamin's grin returned, a smug, almost condescending curve to his lips. Maya, on the other hand, looked nervous. "You came," she said, her voice tentative. "Of course," I replied, my tone smooth and even. "How could I miss this?" Benjamin chuckled, his eyes sweeping over my dress. "You always knew how to make an entrance." I ignored him, turning to Maya instead. "You look beautiful," I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. She did. It just wasn't a beauty I could admire anymore. Before she could respond, a commotion broke out near the back of the hall. Someone rushed past me, muttering about an emergency in the bathroom. I didn't pay it much attention until I caught the word overdose. Whispers spread quickly, guests shifting uncomfortably. My stomach sank. I had a horrible feeling I knew who it was. As I moved toward the hallway, Benjamin's voice called after me, sharp and irritated. "Don't cause a scene." I ignored him, pushing past the crowd until I reached the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, I found her. Lydia. His ex before me. She was slumped against the wall, pale and trembling, her eyes barely open. A small vial lay on the floor beside her. My heart twisted as I knelt beside her, unsure of what to do. "Lydia," I whispered. "What have you done?" She looked at me, her gaze unfocused. I couldn't. Her words trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. I knew exactly how she felt. I called for help, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. As the paramedics arrived and carried her away, I caught Benjamin's eye from across the room. For the first time, there was something resembling guilt in his expression. Good. I turned and walked away, leaving him and his perfect wedding behind. It was their day, but it would never be free of the shadows they had cast. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, I realized I didn't need revenge. They had built their happiness on broken promises and stolen moments. It would crumble on its own, and when it did, I wouldn't be there to catch them. The image of Lydia being wheeled out on a stretcher stayed with me long after I left the venue. Her pale face, her whispered words, they were reminders that I wasn't the only one Benjamin had shattered. For all their laughter and smiles, Maya and Benjamin's perfect day had cracks running deep beneath its surface. I drove aimlessly for hours, the wedding still playing in my mind. The glances, the whispers, the way Benjamin had smirked as though none of me mattered. I hated that it still hurt, that even after everything, part of me had hoped for an apology, a sign that he regretted what he'd done. But he didn't. And he never would. When I finally returned home, the red dress felt heavy on my shoulders. I slipped it off, letting it pool at my feet, and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, tired but unbroken. They might have taken my wedding day, but they hadn't taken me. The next morning, the messages started. Maya's text came first. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't know Lydia would. You shouldn't have had to see that." I stared at the screen, my lips twisting into a bitter smile. No apology for what she'd done to me. No acknowledgement of the betrayal that had led us here. Just another way to center herself. I deleted the message without replying. Then came Benjamin's call. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if we were old friends catching up. "Hey. I just wanted to thank you for coming yesterday. It meant a lot to Maya. I know things ended badly between us, but I hope we can move past it someday." Move past it? As if his betrayal was a minor inconvenience, a pothole on the road to forgiveness. I deleted his message too. For weeks, I heard nothing more from either of them. The world moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't over yet. Lydia's overdose lingered in my mind like an unfinished sentence. I tried to push it away, to focus on myself, but curiosity got the better of me. One evening, I found myself searching for Lydia online. Her social media was sparse, but enough to piece together fragments of her life. A few cryptic posts about heartbreak, about losing herself to someone who didn't care. And then, one post stood out. "They say karma doesn't miss. I just hope I'm around to see it land." I couldn't help but wonder if Lydia's story with Benjamin had ended like mine, or if she had been pulled even deeper into his web. Then, a few days later, an email arrived. No subject line, no sender I recognized. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. The message was short. "You're not the only one he destroyed. Meet me." Attached was an address and a time. My heart raced as I read the message over and over. Lydia. It had to be her. I should have deleted it, ignored it, moved on. But something inside me wouldn't let go. Because maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who wanted to see the cracks in their perfect facade come to light. And maybe, together, we could make sure they paid for what they'd done. The address in the email led me to a small cafe on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the kind of place I would have chosen, quiet, dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and mismatched furniture. It felt like a place where secrets thrived, where people whispered things they couldn't say anywhere else. I arrived early, unable to stop myself from glancing around every few seconds. My palms were damp, and my heart raced with a mix of curiosity and dread. If this was Lydia, what did she want from me? If it wasn't Lydia? I didn't want to finish that thought. The bell over the door chimed, and I turned to see her. She looked different from the woman I had found in the bathroom on their wedding day. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and though she still seemed fragile, there was a sharpness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She spotted me immediately and walked over, her steps cautious but deliberate. "Thanks for coming," she said as she slid into the seat across from me. "Lydia," I said, testing her name like it was a key to some locked door. She nodded, her fingers wrapping tightly around the mug of tea she'd ordered before I arrived. "I wasn't sure if you would." I folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady my voice. "I wasn't sure either." "Why did you want to meet?" She looked down at her tea for a moment, then back at me. "Because you know what it's like. What he does. And because I don't think it's over for either of us." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean?" Lydia leaned in, lowering her voice. "Benjamin has a pattern. He doesn't just leave, he destroys. He makes you feel like you're the problem, like you're the one who failed. And then he moves on like nothing ever happened." She paused, her gaze locking with mine. "That's what he did to me. That's what he did to you. And if he hasn't started doing it to Maya yet, he will." I didn't want to admit how much her words resonated with me. She was right. He hadn't just ended things, he had unraveled me, left me questioning every decision, every moment we'd shared. "Why do you care what happens to Maya?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't. Not really. But I care about what he gets away with. He thinks he can ruin people and walk away unscathed. He doesn't get to keep doing this." Her words hung in the air, heavy and electric. I didn't know what I had expected when I came here, but it wasn't this. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning the room as if to make sure no one was listening. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag and slid it across the table to me. "I've been keeping notes," she said. "About him. The lies, the manipulations, the people he's hurt. I started after he left me. I didn't think I'd ever use it, but then I saw what he did to you, and I realized it wasn't just me." I unfolded the paper, scanning the list of names and dates, the snippets of information she'd collected. Each one was a story, another piece of the puzzle that made up Benjamin's true nature. "You want to expose him," I said, more a statement than a question. Lydia's eyes hardened. "I want to make sure everyone sees who he really is. Before he does to Maya what he did to us." I hesitated, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice, about making sure Benjamin couldn't keep hurting people. But it was also dangerous. What if it backfires? I asked. Her smile was grim. It might. But I'd rather go down trying than let him keep getting away with it. I stared at the list again, the names blurring together. This wasn't what I had expected, but as I sat there, a part of me started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not for him, or for Maya, or for any kind of reconciliation. But for myself. For the chance to take back the power he had stolen from me. I folded the paper and slipped it into my bag. "Okay," I said, meeting Lydia's gaze. "I'm in." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time, she smiled a real smile. "Good. Let's make him regret ever thinking we were disposable." As we left the cafe and stepped into the crisp evening air, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about winning him back or even making him pay. It was about reclaiming what he had taken. And together, Lydia and I would make sure he never forgot the women who refused to let him win. The next few days were spent in a whirlwind of planning, late-night calls, and endless discussions. Lydia and I met in secret, piecing together every shred of evidence she had collected against Benjamin. It wasn't just about his infidelity or the way he discarded people, it was about uncovering the full extent of the damage he had left behind. We needed more than just our stories. We needed voices others who had been hurt by him, who could stand alongside us and show the world who Benjamin really was. Lydia's list of names became our roadmap. The first name on the list was Claire, a woman Benjamin had dated years before Lydia. Reaching out to her wasn't easy. Lydia had tried before and been ignored, but this time, we decided I would try. Maybe my story would resonate. I found Claire's email through a mutual connection and crafted a message. Hi Claire, you don't know me, but I believe we have something in common. I was engaged to Benjamin, and I've recently learned about the pattern of harm he leaves behind. I've been in contact with someone else he hurt Lydia and we're working to bring the truth to light. If you're willing, I'd love to talk. No pressure, but we think your voice could make a difference. To my surprise, Claire replied within a day. I don't know what you're trying to do, but I'm in. It's about time someone held him accountable. The momentum grew from there. Claire shared her story how Benjamin had strung her along for years, isolating her from her friends and making her doubt her worth. She had rebuilt her life, but the scars lingered. She introduced us to others, each with their own tale of betrayal and manipulation. By the end of the week, we had 5 voices, mine, Lydia's, Claire's, and 2 others, Amara and Josie. Each story added another layer to the picture of who Benjamin really was. But it wasn't enough. He'll deny everything, Lydia said during one of our late-night meetings. He'll call us bitter, say we're jealous, and paint himself as the victim. He's good at that, I muttered. Lydia leaned forward, her expression steely. Then we need proof. Something he can't talk his way out of. That was when Claire spoke up. What about Maya? If she knew the truth, maybe she'd listen. The room fell silent. None of us had considered involving Maya. She wasn't a victim yet, not in the way we had been, but we all knew it was only a matter of time. I don't think she'd believe us, I said, my voice low. She's in too deep. Lydia nodded. And even if she did, she might protect him anyway. She chose him over you, remember? I winced but didn't argue. They were right. Maya had made her choice, and it hadn't been me. Still, the thought lingered. If we could find a way to reach her, to show her who Benjamin truly was before he destroyed her life, it might be worth the risk. The next morning, I decided to take the chance. I sent Maya a message, short, direct, and impossible to ignore. Maya, we need to talk. It's about Benjamin. You might not believe me, but I have something to show you. Please, just hear me out. Hours passed with no response. I thought she'd ignored it until, late that evening, my phone buzzed. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. My place. My stomach twisted as I read her reply. I had no idea how she would react or if this would backfire spectacularly. But one thing was clear, tomorrow, the game would change. As I told Lydia about the meeting, she looked at me with a mix of skepticism and hope. Do you really think she'll listen? I don't know, I admitted. But if she doesn't, at least we tried. Lydia nodded, but her eyes were distant. Be careful, she said. Benjamin won't like it if he finds out you're talking to her. And if there's one thing I know about him, it's that he doesn't go down without a fight. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with possibilities, with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. But one thought kept me going. If this worked, if Maya listened, it might be the first step, and Maya's apartment was a world I had never entered, a reflection of a life I once thought I would share with Benjamin. It was on the upper floor of a sleek, modern building, the kind of place that reeked of curated perfection. As I stood at her door, my hands trembled slightly, but I clenched them into fists. I needed to be steady for this. The door opened before I could knock. Maya stood there, her face unreadable, her arms crossed. She looked poised, like always, but there was a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I entered cautiously, the air inside cool and silent. The apartment was immaculate, all cream tones and gold accents, but it felt cold. Empty. Maya motioned to the couch, and I sat, my back straight, my pulse loud in my ears. She remained standing, her posture defensive. "You said you had something to show me," she said, skipping the pleasantries. I nodded, reaching into my bag and pulling out Lydia's notes, the list of names, and a few printed screenshots of messages from Benjamin that the other women had shared with us. I placed them on the coffee table between us, like pieces of evidence in a trial. "This is about Benjamin," I said, keeping my voice steady. "About who he really is." Maya hesitated, then sat across from me. Her eyes flicked to the papers, but she didn't reach for them. "I know you don't trust me," I continued. "And I don't blame you. But this isn't about me trying to ruin your relationship. It's about showing you the pattern, the lies, the manipulation. It's not just me, Maya. He's done this to others. Lydia. Claire. Amara. Josie. And eventually, he'll do it to you, too." She scoffed, leaning back. "You sound bitter." I expected that, but the word still stung. "I am bitter," I admitted. "He hurt me. He humiliated me. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I don't want you to end up like me or worse." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Worse?" I hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Did you know Lydia overdosed in the bathroom at your wedding?" Her composure faltered, a flicker of something shock, maybe guilt crossing her face. "What?" "She was there," I said softly. "Because Benjamin invited her. He knew what he'd done to her, and he still brought her to your wedding, knowing it might push her over the edge." Maya stared at me, her face pale. "You're lying." "I'm not," I said, sliding one of the screenshots toward her. It was a message Lydia had shared with me, one Benjamin had sent weeks before their wedding. "You should come. It'll be good for closure. Besides, Maya won't mind." She read it in silence, her hands shaking slightly as she placed it back on the table. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why not before? Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. I leaned forward, my tone softening. "Maya, I know you love him. I did, too. And I know how good he is at making you feel like you're the only one who matters. But that's what he does. He pulls you in, makes you feel special, and when he's done, he tears you apart. I don't want you to go through that." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she blinked them away. "Maybe you're wrong," she whispered. "Maybe he's different with me." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but instead, I handed her the rest of the evidence. "Read it. Look at the dates, the messages, the stories. If you still think I'm wrong after that, I'll leave, and you'll never hear from me again." She stared at the papers for a long moment before finally picking them up. Her fingers trembled as she leafed through them, her expression shifting with each piece of evidence. I sat in silence, watching the cracks form. Finally, she set the papers down, her hands in her lap, her head bowed. "Why didn't I see it?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Because he didn't want you to," I said. "He's good at hiding who he really is. We all fell for it." Maya looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain. "What do I do now?" For the first time, I felt something close to compassion for her. She wasn't my enemy anymore, she was another victim. "You decide," I said gently. "But whatever you choose, you don't have to do it alone." Maya nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. And as she cried, I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about exposing Benjamin or getting justice. It was about healing both for me and for the people he had hurt. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start. Maya and I parted ways that night without any promises, just a fragile thread of shared understanding. I watched her disappear into her apartment, her shoulders slumped under the weight of what she'd learned. As I walked home, the night seemed unbearably quiet. The stars, faint and scattered, mocked me with their indifference. For the first time, I wondered if all of this, our plan, our voices, our fight, would make any difference at all. Benjamin's charm was a fortress, and we were armed with nothing but the truth. But the truth felt so small. The meeting at Lydia's apartment was heavy from the start. Each of us carried our wounds like invisible scars, and though we were united in purpose, there was a sadness that clung to the air. Claire was the first to speak, her voice brittle. "I thought I was over this," she admitted. "I rebuilt my life, but talking about it brings it all back. The way he made me feel. Like I wasn't enough." Amara nodded, her eyes downcast. "It doesn't go away, does it? The shame. The questions. Was it me? Was I the problem?" "No," Lydia said sharply, her voice trembling with anger. "It wasn't you. It was him. It was always him." Maya sat in the corner, silent, her arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't shared her story yet, and I wasn't sure if she ever would. "I still love him," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. Everyone turned to her. "I know what he is now," she continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I can't just stop loving him." How do you let go of someone who made you feel like the center of the world, even if it was all a lie? No one had an answer. Because we all knew the truth, you didn't let go. Not completely. You carried it with you, the love, the betrayal, the doubt. It became a part of you, a ghost that whispered in the quiet moments. When the plan came together, it felt more desperate than triumphant. We weren't warriors seeking justice, we were broken women trying to make sense of the pieces we'd been left with. The social media post was a last-ditch effort, a scream into the void that might never be heard. Maya hesitated as we prepared to post. "What if he finds out it was me?" she asked, her voice small. "He will," Lydia said flatly. "And he'll make it your fault. That's what he does." Maya looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Do you ever stop feeling like this? Like you're drowning in it?" I wanted to lie, to give her hope. But I couldn't. "No," I said softly. But it gets quieter. It wasn't the answer she wanted, and I hated myself for not being able to give her more. When we finally pressed post, there was no moment of catharsis. Just the sound of our breaths, shallow and uneven, as we stared at our screens. The first few comments trickled in, supportive at first. But then came the others, the ones calling us liars, bitter exes, attention seekers. Benjamin's defenders were quick and loud, their words cutting like knives. I watched Maya's face as she read the comments, her expression crumbling with each one. "They don't believe us," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They don't want to," Lydia said, her tone bitter. "It's easier to believe the lie." Maya stood abruptly, grabbing her coat. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I could, but I can't." I reached out to stop her, but she was already at the door. "Maya, I'm sorry," she said, her back to us. "I'm not as strong as you." And then she was gone. The days that followed were a blur of noise and emptiness. The post continued to spread, but the backlash was relentless. Benjamin issued a statement, calling us misguided and vindictive. He denied everything, of course, and his supporters ate it up. Maya never responded to my messages. Lydia told me she'd heard from someone that Maya had gone back to Benjamin, but I didn't want to believe it. The fight felt futile. We had spoken our truth, but the world hadn't changed. Benjamin was still untouchable, his life as polished and perfect as ever. One night, weeks later, I found myself walking past the cafe where Lydia and I had first met. The lights inside were dim, and the chairs were stacked on the tables. I stood there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't feel like the person I'd been before Benjamin. I wasn't sure I ever would. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something in the corner of the window. A small flyer, faded and curling at the edges. Survivors Speak Out. It was an invitation to a support group meeting, held once a month in a nearby church basement. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let the past stay buried. But another part of me, a quieter, braver part, wanted to step inside. For the first time, I didn't want to carry the weight of silence alone. The church basement was cold and dimly lit, its folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the air smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. I almost turned back, but a woman standing by the coffee table smiled at me. Her warmth was disarming, and before I knew it, I was seated in one of the chairs, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The group was small, only 7 of us. As introductions began, I realized that I wasn't alone in my pain. Everyone here had their own ghosts, their own stories of love turned toxic, of manipulation and heartbreak. When it was my turn, my voice trembled. I hesitated, the weight of my story pressing against my chest. I'm someone who loved the wrong person. There was no judgment, only quiet nods of understanding. I thought he was everything, I continued. Charming, kind, perfect. But he wasn't. He broke me. He broke all of us. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to go on. He made me believe I was the problem. And even now, knowing the truth, I still feel like I'm carrying pieces of him inside me. Tears slipped down my cheeks, and I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. But no one looked away. They stayed with me, their silence a kind of comfort. After the meeting, the woman who had smiled at me earlier approached. She introduced herself as Elena, one of the group leaders. You spoke beautifully, she said. It takes courage to share your story. I don't feel courageous, I admitted. I feel broken. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch gentle. Healing isn't about being unbroken. It's about learning to live with the cracks. The next few weeks passed in a blur of group meetings and quiet moments of reflection. The support group became my lifeline, a place where I could lay my burdens down without fear of judgment. But the world outside the church basement was harder. Benjamin's denial of our claims had been masterful. He painted himself as the victim, using his charm to sway public opinion. The comments on our posts became crueler, and Lydia began withdrawing. One night, I called her, desperate to hear her voice. I don't know if I can keep doing this, she said, her voice flat. It feels like shouting into a void. No one cares, and he's still winning. We care, I said softly. I care. Lydia sighed. But is that enough? He's still out there, and Maya. She paused, and I heard the bitterness in her voice. She went back to him. After everything. I closed my eyes, the weight of her words settling over me. She's not ready, I said. Maybe she never will be. Maybe none of us are, Lydia muttered before hanging up. One night, weeks later, I received a text from an unknown number. Can we meet? It was Maya. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. She looked pale, her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For what? I asked. For leaving, she said, her eyes filling with tears. For going back to him. I thought I could fix it. Fix him. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But I can't, she continued. He hasn't changed. He won't. And I can't keep pretending I'm okay. Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. You don't have to pretend anymore. She looked up at me, her tears falling freely now. I'm so scared, she whispered. What if I'm nothing without him? You're not nothing, I said firmly. You're enough. You always were. Her sobs filled the quiet cafe, and I stayed with her until they subsided. Maya didn't leave Benjamin right away, but she started to pull away, bit by bit. She joined the support group, sitting quietly at first but eventually sharing her story. Slowly, she began to reclaim pieces of herself. Lydia, too, found solace in the group, though she still carried a bitterness that time alone couldn't erase. As for me, I learned to live with the cracks. Some days, the weight of what Benjamin had done still lingered like a shadow. But other days, I felt lighter, freer. I learned to find beauty in the scars he had left behind, not because of him, but in spite of him. And though the world hadn't changed, I realized that I had. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was no longer defined by the pain he had caused. I was something more, something whole in my own way. And that was enough. The day I saw him again, the air was heavy with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. It had been months since our stories had gone public, and though the chaos had quieted, the scars of it lingered in the corners of my life. I was walking home from a group meeting, my bag slung over my shoulder, when I spotted him standing outside the cafe where it had all begun. Benjamin. He looked the same, like time hadn't dared to touch him. His suit was immaculate, his posture confident, his smile as polished as ever. He saw me before I could turn away. "Amelia," he said, his voice soft, almost warm. "Can we talk?" Everything in me screamed to walk away, to keep moving and never look back. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something unsteady, something human. Against my better judgment, I stopped. "What do you want, Benjamin?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He hesitated, his hands slipping into his pockets. "I wanted to see you." "To explain." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Explain? After everything? After what you did to me, to all of us?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "You didn't mean to?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You shattered me, Benjamin. You broke all of us. And for what? To feel powerful? To feel like you mattered more than the rest of us?" He flinched, and for the first time, I saw something crack in his perfect mask. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. I needed you to know that I regret it. I regret everything." The words hung in the air, hollow and weightless. "Regret doesn't undo what you did," I said. "It doesn't erase the nights I spent blaming myself, or the way you made me feel like I was nothing. It doesn't bring back the pieces of me you took." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I know." A part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. But another part of me, the part that had been healing, slowly but surely, felt nothing but emptiness. "You don't get to make this about you," I said finally. "Whatever guilt you're carrying, that's yours to bear. Not mine. Not anymore." Benjamin looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name, regret, perhaps, or shame. But it didn't matter. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," I said, my voice steady. "But you won't find it here." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone on the sidewalk. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: closure. Benjamin's apology, if that's what it had been, didn't erase the past. But it wasn't for him to erase. It was mine to carry, mine to let go. And I was finally ready. Months turned into years. The support group became a second family, a place where healing wasn't just a possibility but a reality. Maya left Benjamin for good and found her strength in ways none of us had expected. Lydia began to let go of her anger, finding solace in art and activism. As for me, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I found love again, not in someone else, but in myself. I learned to trust my own voice, to see my own worth. Benjamin faded into the background of my memory, no longer a ghost that haunted me, but a lesson I had learned and moved beyond. And though the scars remained, they became a testament to my resilience. because I had survived. And I had chosen myself.
What's up, story lovers? This is the Story Guy, and if you're hungry for crazy tales and mind-blowing narratives, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our weekly dose of crazy cheating stories, fun fiction and gut-ripping comedy from around the world. But that's not all. We also create our own original stories, and trust me, you won't find these anywhere else. Want even more spine-tingling reads? Head down to the description and grab our exclusive story collections. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.